Donald Hipple was born in Big Stone County, born and raised in Pleasant Valley, or what is known as Pleasant Valley, which is a farming area northeast of town. He graduated from high school in 1943 and was working at a furniture store in Morris.
Okay.
He was in Morris because he went to school at Morris Ag School, which later became University of Minnesota Morris. So Donald, anyway, at 18 was eligible for draft, and he was drafted just before his 19th birthday. And so he was put on a train and sent to a camp in Georgia, I forget the name, where he was to receive his basic training. He was there 3 days when he got the call to go overseas.
Really?
Now, at that time, the United States had underestimated the replacement rate. They estimated it would be 50% going into Germany proper. It was closer to 80%. So they were rushing men to the replacements to the front as quickly as possible. So with 3 days of basic, he's put on a ship on transit, and it took about 8 days to get across to Scotland. He, during the transit across the Atlantic Ocean, he received more basic training.
Oh, really?
On the deck of the ship.
So they expedited the process for
Yes.
those young men. Wow.
And the same was true when he landed in France after D-Day. There were what were known as depots, replacement depots, where soldiers were sent and waited until they were assigned to a combat unit. So another 12 days of waiting at the replacement depot. Donald received more basic training and then was sent up to the front to a company that was engaging in an advance through Hurtgen Forest. Now, Hurtgen Forest had no military value whatsoever, but some general decided that it needed to be taken. Francis, or Frank Kleindl from Graceville, was in that unit, and I had the chance to interview him person to person, and I asked him what Hurtgen was like. I'd read a little bit about it, and he said it was nothing but rocks and hills. It was the most god-awful terrain that he'd ever been exposed to. So here's Donald Hipple, now 19 years old, about 4 weeks out of high school, going into combat as a replacement. Now, first of all, replacements were not looked upon with great favor by the men that were already there. Here comes to a veteran, a replacement comes in as somebody who is replacing a friend of his, for one thing.
And didn't also go through the whole process that the rest of the company may have experienced as well.
Correct. And also, replacements had a horrible survival rate. Really? It's been shown many times in military books and so forth that replacements were shunned, actually, to a great deal by the members, the surviving members of the platoon or company, whatever. And they didn't want to even get to know them because they knew they weren't going to be around very long. So here's Donald Hipple now, fresh out of high school, 19 years old, going to a place that had been described as the most god-awful terrain. And then the other thing is that the Germans had fused their artillery to do tree bursts.
Oh, really?
And what happens is that you have a company of men moving in formation through the woods where the artillery shells are bursting into the limbs above, which then spreads down like an umbrella. The safest place to be in a situation like that is not out in the clear, but right next to the trunk of the tree that's being hit. Well, of course, Donald didn't know this, and he was scared for another thing, and he was not welcomed by his compatriots. The description of the artillery burst in a resource that I picked up shows that it was horrendous shattering of limbs and steel that came down on. And then, of course, there were other shells that burst on the ground. After the battle, Mr. and Mrs. Hipple got a letter that their son, Donald, was missing in action. 2 days later, they got another telegram saying he probably was KIA, killed in action. They looked for Donald through that winter and never found him till the following spring. He was buried in dirt due to the barrage. Next story is about Del Toner. Graduated from Ortonville High School. He was a member of the local National Guard unit, Company L of the 135th Regiment. Were called immediately into action when war broke out after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Company L was down in Louisiana on maneuvers, learning the tricks of the trade, so to speak. And they were called to action. Dell and many other local men, also men from Graceville, Clinton, and Millbank, and I think one from Marietta, all belonged to Company L. They were shipped overseas to Scotland, where they trained more intensely, and then were put on ships and sent down to North Africa, where they were probably the first Americans to hit foreign soil.
Okay. Was this against German or Italian forces in North Africa?
The French government,
The
Vichy, yes.
Vichy regime?
The Vichy French.
Oh, really?
Some fought hard and some didn't. But we did prevail and marched on to Libya, where we met Rommel at the Kasserine Pass. And it was during this time, the first meeting of Company L and the rest of the 34th Division Red Bull Division, which was the Minnesota National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Got the stuffings kicked out of them by Rommel. Not to their fault. They were green, and Rommel had been at war for 3 years already, so they were seasoned.
And he was also considered one of the greatest strategists of the war.
He was.
Yes.
He was.
Yeah.
So they were pushed back through the Kasserine Pass, where they dug in. Rommel backed off, and then a few days later, the Americans pushed again through the Kasserine Pass, this time engaging Rommel on a more even plane. And Del Toner and several other men were taken prisoner. They were sent to Tunis, and then to Italy, and then to Germany. Stalag 7B first, and then Stalag 3A, and then Stalag 2A, where Del spent 2.5 years in prison. At first, the food was respectable, but then later on, the food got less and less. Of course, the Germans were trying to feed Germans and not Americans, so they would get some leafy greens, could be dandelions. Peas were another thing that they got, and a small pat of margarine per week. The thing that kept them alive was the Red Cross packages that they got.
Oh, really?
And I'd like to read what contents were in a Red Cross package.
Okay, that'd be great.
Powdered whole milk, 1 pound. American cheddar cheese, 8 ounces. Liver paste, 6 ounces. Corned beef, 12 ounces. Pork, luncheon meat, 12 ounces. Raisins, 15 ounces. Sugar granulated, 8 ounces. Lemon beverage powder, 12 ounces. Instant cocoa, 8 ounces. Instant coffee, 8 ounces. Sweet chocolate, 4 ounces. Hard candy, 6 ounces. Cigarettes, 4 packs. Smoking tobacco, 2 1/4 ounces. I guess some guys had pipes or could roll their own. Luncheon biscuit, type C, 7 ounces. And matches, 2 booklets. That was in a normal Red Cross package.
Was that per man?
Per man. Only the Germans were hungry too.
Yeah.
And they handled the packages first. So, of course, they got a lot of the good stuff.
Yeah.
And even though the officers complained that their packages were being raided, it was a matter of, oh, we don't know what happens to it. Del is Del is in a prison with non-commissioned officers. They actually got paid by the Geneva Convention a wage for work that they did.
Really?
They got the same pay that a German soldier of the same grade would get. So, for instance, Del was a corporal, so he got paid each day the equivalent of a German soldier corporal paid, which is about 40 cents a day. So it would take him a whole week to save up enough money at 40 cents a day to buy some oranges at the Camp PX. I was surprised to learn that the Germans operated PXs in their camps, prisoner camps. Anyway, in 1945, the Russians were pushing closer and closer to the prison camp, and the Germans wanted them to get the Americans out of there. So they called them together one day, and out the door they went. This was in January. Snow on the ground, cold. No warm clothing. Just get out the door and get in formation and march. They left so quickly that Dell left behind his journal, which he was keeping, and he had the names of some of his friends and what they were doing. He had some drawings that he'd made, and he wrote a poem to his mom, which I would like to read.
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
Dear Mom, I'm thinking of you in my own particular way, of the days before I left you and things we used to say, of the many times while I was little that you took me upon your knee, of the many beautiful stories and songs you sang to me, of the many times you warned me to care and watch my health, just like the fairy princess watching o'er her little elf. But now, dear Mom, I've grown up and have gone off to fight, not because I like to, but for a cause so just and right. But now, dear Mom, in closing, I hope you will think of me, of the many times you took and cuddled and placed me on your knee. May the Lord watch and keep you from all mean and earthly harm, until I come home again and monopolize your charm. Good night, dear Mom, Dell. Some of the guys that were in the same prison with Dell Toner were Sergeant Howard Miller from Millbank, Sergeant Cecil Beatty from Clinton, PFC Manley Dotson from Millbank, Private Milo Lucas Beardsley, Private Robert Noel Ortonville, Lieutenant Harold O'Neill Graceville, Sergeant Bennett Hagan Clinton, Staff Sergeant Edwin Hartman Ortonville, Sergeant Orville Kennedy Clinton, Sergeant Sidney Martinson Clinton, Lieutenant Elmer Honkamp Graceville, Sergeant Melvin Larson Ortonville, PFC Walter Block Corral, and Lieutenant Harvey Pansch Corral.
Oh, that's a lot.
That ends the story on Dell. Although they did make a 300-mile march in the winter to stay ahead of the Russians until they were finally pushed up to the American lines where they were liberated.
Did all of our local soldiers who were in that camp make it home, or did some of them?
I don't know for sure. I know that the guys from Clinton and Ortonville and Graceville made it home. Millbank and Corral, I don't know. Harvey Pansch was one of the soldiers that was in prison camp with the Germans.
Mhm.
He got there by flying. He flew a P-38 Lightning, and his mission that day was to do some aerial photography of the terrain in and around Vienna. So he was making his umpteenth pass when he got a call from some South African pilots.
Mhm.
You better be careful. You've got somebody coming in on your tail. Harvey looked, and I don't know if he got a rearview mirror or what, but he saw he was being pursued by two German fighters. So he headed out across the Alps and was shot at. Finally, they had enough hits where his plane started to fail. So to bail out of a P-38, you have to go upside down.
Oh, really?
Because it was a twin boom airplane with a stabilizer bar between the two booms. So he ejected down, landed in the mountainside snowdrift, and started an avalanche.
Oh, really?
And went roaring down the hill. When he got to the bottom and everything was stopped, he was buried up to his chest, trying to dig his way out. And he looked down the road, and here comes the German patrol.
Really?
Which they, of course, make him surrender and take him off to prisoner of war camp, someplace in the Austrian Alps. Harvey said the German soldiers were really quite nice. They knew the war was ending. They played cards.
They didn't want to be there as much anyway.
No, they didn't want to be there any more than Harvey wanted to be there. And they kept asking him, what the Americans were going to do to him, do to the Germans once they won the war. And Harvey told them, don't worry, we Americans are fair. We understand the situation. You'll just go back home, whatever's left of it. So in one day, Harvey Pansch from Corral, Minnesota, gets shot down, parachutes out, starts an avalanche, and is captured. We polled people to tell us their remembrance of home World War II stories.
I was going to ask you about that at one point myself.
Yeah. Now, I was born in 1940, so I didn't really know much about the war until 1945.
But do you have memories of victory in Europe or victory in the Pacific?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I was out in the yard playing in a swing that my dad had made by tying a tire to a big cottonwood tree when my mom came out and hugged me and said, the war is over, honey. But there was a prisoner of war camp in Ortonville.
I've heard of that. Yep.
And at that time, my dad was an employee of Big Stone Candy Company, and part of his pay was a house free of rent-free. And that's located, or was located, down, it was the old Long Henry Swigum gas station, which I don't know if you know where that is.
I don't know where that is, no.
You go over the bridge on the way to Big Stone.
Okay.
Just as you get over the bridge, you take a left-hand turn and go down that county road.
Okay, yeah.
That's old Highway 12. Down at the end of the tar goes straight ahead, the gravel goes right. And there, where you make the right-hand turn, is the Long Henry gas station. Anyway, the house was just across the railroad tracks. There are no railroad tracks there anymore, but the road bed is there. The house was just on the other side of the railroad tracks. And in the evening and on weekends, I'd hear these men singing songs, but I couldn't make out what they were singing. And I'd ask my mother, Dad, I didn't dare ask. I asked my mother, who was it singing? And she'd always tell me, never mind, and stay away from there. Well, of course, telling a 5-year-old to stay away from there is like saying, don't put jam on the cat. You know, you're going to do it. One of my old time friends lived over in the Long Henry house. It was Swigum at that time. He knew what they were. He knew they were Germans. He told me that. And so we devised a plan to go shoot a bunch of Germans. I didn't have a weapon at the time, but that didn't make any difference because Bob Swigum had a BB gun, no BBs, and a cap gun, no cap. He gave me the cap gun, and we marched along the old Minnesota River channel down towards the prisoner of war camp, which is roughly where Roush Brothers Granite is right now.
Really? Okay.
The Highway 12 didn't go past Roush's at that time. So anyway, as we were approaching, I crouched down, going through weeds and stuff. And just as we lined up and got ready to do some serious shooting, a voice hollered out, "You kids get out of there right now!" Boy, did we take off. Through nettles and gooseberry bushes and whatever, scratches and scratches. We made it all the way back. I suppose it was a half mile to Swigum's gas station, Long Henry's gas station. So I asked Bob, I said, who was that guy that yelled at us? He said, well, he's the one that's in charge of the Germans. I think his name is Hitler.
Were the prisoners in that camp, were they used for labor? Were they used for farm work?
They were. They were paid $1 a day. And Joanne Martin, who lived down by the gas station I keep referring to, she was a young woman at the time. And she said, in the morning, the trucks would go out with prisoners. And when they drove by, it was always, woohoo, hello, honey. Of course, men will be men.
Yeah. For the most part, were they pretty well behaved POWs?
Very well behaved. There was never an incident of course, where would they run to? They could fight amongst themselves, I guess. But I've never heard anyone mention any such problem.
Okay. Well, that's fascinating history. Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. There's a monument down in the courthouse property.
Okay.
It's a pillar of about 15 feet with a globe on top. And on it, on the four sides of the pillar, are bronze plaques with the name of anyone who fought in the Spanish Civil War, Spanish-American War, and World War I. It was put up in 1920.
Okay.
it must have been something great at the time, because it is an impressive monument even by today's standards. And yet I think probably nobody barely looks at it anymore. I think we're doing the right thing by memorializing young men who went off to battle, not by building monuments, although Washington certainly has its share. But out here, monuments are not the thing to keep the flame alive. It's little celebrations like this one,
Storytelling.
to keep alive the story of young men who went off to war, some of which gave the supreme sacrifice. I don't think they died to preserve the world as it is today, but we owe it to them to make this a better world and honor them properly.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Jay, for telling us these stories and sharing your insight. Appreciate it very much.